Hello and good day. Today we've got an AltRider skid plate assembly to install on our BMW R1300GS Adventure. This part, as you can see, fits both the GS and the Adventure, and it will support the different variants whether you've got the Rally Edition or not. What comes in the box is the mounting bracket that attaches to the rear of the skid plate via those 6 screws, and then the 2 bolts on the front and nuts, they actually are used to attach that to the bike itself near the center stand. And then the other items in the box, the real important parts, is the special polymer high energy absorption and high heat pads that mount directly to the bike, and they sandwich between the skid plate and the bike. These are designed to absorb the energy from an impact and then also withstand the high heat of the engine, as they will be in direct contact with things like the exhaust pipe or direct bottom of the engine itself. The 3 different parts that you have there, there's the front piece, the middle one, and then the 2 back there are mounted in the rear. The middle one is attached with a special adhesive that they have worked with 3M on that will sustain and support the high heat and the powder coating of the engine. This mounts in the middle on the lower side. And then this was the front one. It has 2 bolts. You'll use the bolts that you take off from the factory mounting bracket and use it there, along with the 2 rear ones. You use the same thing. The bolts that you take off is how you're going to attach that. You'll want to use the Loctite that's included, and then they also include a tie wrap that's used to hold the breathing tubes that are on the left-hand side of the bike to the skid plate. And then this is the skid plate itself. You can see it's quite stout and wide. It has good protection, and it also has the hole in the bottom for the drain, so that you can do your oil changes. Installation is going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to use some of the factory hardware to install the new skid plate, and then we're also going to be loosening up on the crash bar. So in the 1300 GSA, it does by default come with the lower crash bars, and so we're going to loosen up all of the bolts on the crash bars. There is, in this case, I've got 4 connection points because I have a Touratech bar here that holds and provides an additional support on the rear. And then I've got, we have the standard 3 connection points, one here, one in the front lower, and then you've got one in the upper section up inside there. So we'll be loosening those up so that you can maneuver the crash bar around, because it's going to be sandwiched, the skid plate will be sandwiched between the crash bar and the bike itself, so we need to loosen those up to be able to install it in there. And then underneath the skid plate itself has got some Torx that we need to take off and remove. So you'll see we've got a number. On this one I have the Rally Edition, so it's a longer one, and I have 6 bolts that I'll need to remove. Here's a side-by-side comparison, and you can see how much wider footprint that the AltRider has. It does have the cutouts there for the oil so that you can get access to the drain plugs. You don't have to take the whole thing off. And the forward section is also got a little bit more beef to it. If we get down here and see, you can actually see the thickness of this skid plate as compared to the thickness on what comes from BMW. So obviously quite a step up on this particular one. And the bolts on this one were T30s to get rid of or to take off the 6 bolts here, and it comes right off. And then there's some hardware underneath the bike that we're going to actually need to remove as well. And then once we remove that, we'll be able to start installing the hardware for the AltRider, which will start by putting the absorption pads on there, and then we'll also mount the bracket to the rear part back here. That aluminum plate that you saw earlier, we'll be mounting that with the screws. So we'll get to that here. We'll just go ahead and take care of getting the hardware off the bottom of the bike from BMW first. Taking off the hardware, the mounting hardware for the factory skid plate incorporates a few different brackets. One is this front bracket right here, and these are T40s that we'll be removing. And then you've got a center bracket that sits up in here, and there's 2 bolts, one on each side. Take that off. And then you've got back here another bracket that has bolts coming in from the side on either side that you need to remove. That'll allow us to install the
skid plate from AltRider. The one section in here too that you want to do is you want to clean this off. The rubber middle section that I showed that has the adhesive part on it that's going to come in here and attach. So you want to clean this off well with some alcohol wipes to get that cleaned off. And you might want to take a chance to clean off underneath here with the dirt since you don't get in here that often. But otherwise, that's the main part that does need to be cleaned off because it needs the adhesion from the pad that needs a clean surface to be able to adhere to. And that'll be it for the removal. So the other thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to take off or remove this bolt completely out and then loosen the other bolts for the lower crash bar if you have them. If you do not have crash bars and you're on a GS instead of a GSA that didn't have the crash bars, obviously you're going to need to remove a bolt or put a bolt in there if there's not one. There is one that's supplied with the skid plate that's a shorter bolt, but in this case we have crash bars, so we'll be reusing these particular bolts to go back in. But we'll remove these and loosen the others so that you've got plenty of play to slide the skid plate in between, because it'll sit in between here and the engine. It's going to go between the spacer and the engine essentially.
So we're looking at the middle bracket. You can see we've removed the T40 bolts and hold it on, but there is a wire harness here that goes to one of the sensors. You just need to be careful. If you kind of angle it and twist it out, it comes out without damaging or needing to disconnect that wire. Just be careful so you don't hurt anything. You can discard it. You're not going to need this piece for the installation. However, you will need the bolts, so you want to keep these. These are going to be used for the rear polymers to attach to the bottom of the engine.
Left-hand side of the bike, we have the breather tubes, and they're just attached with a clip, so they just pull out. You just pop those out, no problem at all. That's what the tie wrap is for. You'll insert that through some holes on the skid plate, and then when you install it, you'll just put those through and zip tie it down and hold it in place. And it's a very simple process there. The bolt here, again, was a T40 bolt. It comes right out. There is no nut on the other side to worry about, and I'll do that on the other side, and that'll take care of this rear bracket assembly. It will come right off. The rear brake, the rear brake foot pedal may be in the way on the other side, and one of the things that they had recommend is pushing in the master or the rear brake caliper to push some of the fluid out to give you more play in that rear brake. So that may be something you need to do. It just depends on your bike and whether you can get access easily to where the bolt is on the right hand side, right next to where the brake pedal is. This one doesn't get in the way. You can access it down here on the bottom, so you don't have to worry about that with the shifting lever on this left side. So on this one here, on my GSA, I did not need to do anything with the caliper. I was able to just push the brake pedal down. I did flip this into the lower position versus the upper position on the GSA. I've got the Rally Edition, so it has the certain options. You may or may not have that on your bike, but I was able to push this down and access the bolt very easily. All right, so this is the rear bracket that we're going to use to hold the skid plate to the rear of the bike. It needs to be mounted to the skid plate. So the little screws there that you see, the bolts, those will be mounted via these holes into the skid plate from the underside of the skid plate into that. As you can see, they have the nuts pre-embedded into the piece of metal there, the bracket itself. And then you'll use these bolts with the serrated nuts on them to mount it to the actual bike itself when you're ready to mount it. But we first need to mount this to the skid plate, and to do that, it just goes on as such. It fits nice and tight in here, as you can tell, but it just mounts inside there. We'll put the bolts from underneath and go into those, so you'll be coming from the side here, and you can see they've got beveled flanges there for the bolts to sit in flat against it, which is great. Definitely use some blue Loctite that's supplied so that it keeps them secure and prevents them from backing out due to vibration. So we'll go ahead and get that mounted up. All right, so now that bracket's installed, you can see how they sit nice and flush so they won't catch on anything, which is great. And they're mounted from this back side. There's two on this side, two on the bottom, and then of course two on the other side. Okay, so if we look at this front bumper, this is going to go on only one way, which is nice, makes it simple. There's a groove back here that you can see that goes along underneath. There's a cross tube that goes between the left and right header, and so that's going to lean against that. And then on the inside there is a cutout here on the side here with a circle, and we'll show you here in a second there where how that mates up, and it'll just go right up in place. So if we come over here and look at the bike, so there's the header cross member piece that little insert goes, and then over here you've got the circle part that it's going to go over top of. So eventually this will sit in here when we mount it up, and it'll sit there just like that. And we'll put the bolts that we use to take out the bracket that was on the factory, that was holding that factory bracket on there. We'll be taking those bolts and putting them in here with some Loctite and getting them secured and torqued down. Alright, so we've got the middle polymer shock absorber. This one has the AltRider name on it, and that faces to the rear and only goes on one way, and it just goes right up here and sits inside there, and it'll adhere to the tops of this and on this side over here with those 3Ms. So we'll take that off and adhere it on there, and it'll be good to go. That's on there. Unfortunately, the sticker where they put the pad was a little too far in, and it doesn't connect up here to touch. There's not much place for it to touch over there, so it won't stick to the piece. This side stuck pretty well. Again, it's not a big deal because the skid plate is actually going to sandwich in here and hold it in place. This is more just a placeholder and a way to keep it in place while you install the actual skid plate itself. These ones are necessary to bolt in, and the rear ones, but the middle one is just sitting there. So now we're going to move on to mounting the rear ones back here. Alright, so now we're going to mount the rear ones. You can see this one, I don't have the bolt in there yet, but it's sitting in place. How you mount them is it has a thicker, wider part on the back there, as you can see. This goes to the fat part goes to the back, the skinny part goes to the front, and it has a little lip there on the front, you can see, and that is going to sit on top of this rounded edge here. But it just goes, goes in here, and the other one goes on the corresponding hole on the other side, and just bolts up again with the T40 bolts that you took out before that held this bracket on. Put some blue Loctite on and hold it on and torque it into specs. Alright, so here it is installed on the 1300 GSA. You've got the holes for access to drain the oil. Covers quite well towards the back. Make sure that you put your blue Loctite on your pins back here, or your bolts rather, back here on this one. This one goes on pretty easy. The other side is kind of a bear because of the brake. It was a little bit more difficult than the factory one because the factory one was a little shorter and also a different mounting scenario, I guess, but it was easier to install, but this one wasn't that bad. I started with getting this rear set up. One of the things you do want to make sure is that it sets in here correctly. It goes in behind on the inside of this center stand in order to get the proper placement. If it's not in there correctly, it will not line up, but as soon as you do get it correctly lined up in here, the front goes in easily without any problems, as well as the other side. It went in extremely well, but as you can see, it does a great job of protecting everything, and the pads underneath there will help absorb some of the energy, but very well made, and you're protecting your header, you're protecting the front lower part of the engine, and you do have access to be able to get in here and get access to the oil so that you don't have to remove the skid plate to be able to do an oil change. And so hopefully that'll make it a little easier. But that is the skid plate. Hopefully that helps you in being able to install it yourself. Overall, probably took me about 45 minutes in all. Stopping and filming took a little longer, but it's a fairly straightforward installation. If you follow the instructions from AltRider, they have a really good detailed breakdown and some tips that how to put on the bolts in the back here to put the nuts on using a box wrench and such. That worked really well. But overall, it was a fairly straightforward, easy installation on a scale of, how hard it would be. It would be pretty straightforward and pretty easy for anyone to install it. If you have any mechanical inclination at all, you shouldn't have any issues installing it. Again, the video from AltRider, which I'll provide a link to their video, has a really good job at even further details and breaking it down through the entire process. But for me, again, it's a pretty straightforward implementation, and now I've got a little bit more sturdier, more coverage underneath if we go off-road with the bike. Thanks, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you on the next one.